Welcome to Business Leader Breakthroughs, where we help unlock the potential in you, your teams, and your business. I'm your host, Ryan Castle, along with Dr. Mike Ashby. We'll share insights, experiences, and stories on achieving breakthrough success in business and life. To learn more, click the link in the episode show notes or go to thebreakthrough.co. Now let the breakthroughs begin. Hey Mike, welcome along to the podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to be here as always.
Nice of you to join me again. Mike, we've been having some really interesting discussions with senior people leaders.
Yeah.
With some quite significant organisations.
Yeah.
And there's a question that really seems to be at the forefront of trying to gauge where their thinking is at.
Yeah.
And I think that question revolves around, in your organisation, are you trying to improve it or are you trying to transform it?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things that people get very kind of excited about transformation and kind of major change and stuff. Actually, that's not always appropriate. You know, it really is understanding where we're at in our cycle, where we're at relative to our market. Can we do kind of steady improvements? And, you know, we can always improve. Or do we need a fundamental shift? Do we need to kind of reset ourselves to compete better in the market, to adapt? So yeah. I think it's a great question, and I think people feel like, well, maybe I should be in transform. No, you shouldn't. Not necessarily. You know, if your business is doing
But it sounds so much sexier.
I know, and people get so excited about big change programs and 75% of them fail is the problem.
Yes.
So be really careful. And in fact, this is the problem with, particularly at scale, transformation at scale. And while we've been talking to bigger businesses, this is actually true of smaller businesses too. So what we're about to talk about, scale is a relative thing.
Yes.
You know, in an organisation of a couple of thousand people, yeah, that looks big. In an organisation of 20 people, it still can be quite a big scale if you're kind of taking people out to retrain and reset. So scale is a relative thing. And I think it's then about, in a smaller organisation, it's about individuals, or it's about the kind of capability of the organisation as a whole. So let's just context these comments with that.
True.
Yeah? Okay.
And there is, of course, a third option, which is to do nothing.
Do nothing. It's a goodie. Very cheap.
Yeah, well, cheap in the short term. Very cheap in the short term. Does tend to result in you racing backwards at a great rate of knots without actually realising it.
Yeah.
Until you realise your customer base has been decimated by organisations that are not there. Okay, so let's take it. All the people listening to us today will be very smart individuals.
Totally.
So they will not be doing the do nothing.
Nope.
Do nothing. They'll be in the improve or transform. Let's, for this podcast, talk about the transform piece. Yep. If you were trying to start a transformation, lead one, evolve one, you've been doing some reading around the McKinsey framework.
Yeah, really interesting and very affirming. McKinsey are famous as management consultants and have been for a long time. They're very, very expensive, but they do use quite a lot of their exorbitant fees to fund research, and they love the data. They just love the data, and they can tell us that this kind of approach to leadership development was 6.1 times more effective than what? I don't know, but it was 6.1 times more effective. So what they talk about is leadership development at scale. And what they're saying is transformation is about developing leaders. And it certainly, it's consistent with what we've seen with AMP, which is if you want to transform your organisation, you do so through developing leaders in the middle. We talk about changing the culture from the middle out. Well, that's kind of what they talk about without necessarily using exactly those words. And their book was published, Leading at Scale, was published in 2018, which is when we started AMP. So I've been really interested, to read their stuff. So they have this thing called the Leadership Diamond. So what they're talking about is leadership development programs. The purpose of those programs is to transform the organisation from within. First thing they talk about is that there are a few skills which drive disproportionate value. And what that means in English is 80-20, which we absolutely get. There's a few things that if you do them well, they will have a massive impact. And there's a whole bunch of other things that have less impact. The two that they kind of focus in on are self-awareness and a learning mindset. And that's near enough. What we would say is actually, we would call it mindfulness at work. Self-awareness, mindfulness, they're part of the same thing, but that mindfulness is not just a self-awareness, it's also an awareness of others. So the mindfulness piece that we see is actually about how am I operating in this situation? How are they operating in this situation? What is this? What's really going on here? So that's a little distinction in the first instance. And then the second one is around...
Oh, I was just going to add in, so we're really talking about what some people refer to as soft skills.
Yes.
But interestingly, we're seeing more and more organisations now talk about them as core skills, because they realise that in a world that is changing so quickly, so much volatility, uncertainty, etc., that actually these skills that you're talking about here are the critical ones.
They are.
Because you can no longer go, let me teach you this skill. Yeah, and I'll use a blatant example, how to use Excel. You know, it's a skill, we can go to a workshop, we can learn Excel. Will that thing be what helps us transform our organisations and our people going forward? Probably not.
Probably not.
But those master skills you talk about around learning to learn, self-awareness, these are the things that are critical, not just for our senior leaders or business owners, but for people throughout our organisation.
You know, the conversation we had the other day, somebody was saying, well, look, about 50% of the roles we're talking about will not exist in 5 years' time. And we want to be able to take those people with us on the journey. We don't want to have to kind of bring in a whole lot of new people. We want them, we need to be reskilling people. So that means people have got to know how to learn. And that learning mindset, there's a real key element to that. But these things, I don't think you can attack self-awareness and learning mindset directly. I think you do it
really? I can't just tell my team, be more aware, have a learning mindset.
And which people
be a better
do.
Coach.
Hey,
I've told them to be. That doesn't work.
Hey, come on, have a growth mindset. It doesn't work like that.
No way.
It actually, for most people, particularly operational managers, they learn through doing. So when we talk about mindfulness at work, it's always about here's how you do it in practice. This is what it looks like in practice, not in theory. And the same goes with the learning mindset. You know, you'll never learn so much as when you have to teach something, right? So coaching is actually really fundamental. Developing those coaching skills for others helps you learn. So we kind of go, okay, McKinsey talk about self-awareness and learning mindset. We would call it mindfulness at work and coaching. And that's how people are going to be able to adapt to the changing nature of work and roles.
Okay, so part one of the Leadership Diamond, critical skills we've talked about. The second one is about organisation-wide engagement.
Yeah, this was really interesting. They talk about getting a critical mass of pivotal influences. Again, in English, in plain language. What that meant was having a sufficient number of people who would carry the change agents we used to call them. And they talked about that requires leadership programs that have breadth, depth and pace. And the breadth was really interesting because they said somewhere between 5 and 15% of the people in the organisation. And when you and I have gone and talked to people about AMP, and we've said this is little, and they go, how many people are we talking? And we'd say, wow, 10%. And they go, yeah, that sounds right. And we found that pretty consistently. So we would affirm that number. And of course with technology now, we can do that. We can take 10%. It's not anymore, it doesn't anymore have to be about taking 10% of your people out for days on end into workshops. And that's part of the second part of it, the depth piece. The days of workshops and one-on-one coaching, they still have their place, but not a big place anymore.
No.
The depth piece that McKinsey talk about it based on neuroscience and how people learn, which is what we've done a lot of work on, is it's at least 6 months, preferably 9. Well, our program's 12 months. And for a very specific reason, which is that gives time to practice, that gives time to go into depth into these things. Unlike the old workshop stuff where you slam it down, it's a kind of this massive download for 8 hours or whatever, and they get back to work and what was that? What am I going to do now?
The research would suggest that if that's the only format of the learning is the workshop type, we've forgotten 80% of it within 2 weeks.
Exactly.
So we might apply one takeaway or something from that kind of workshop, but in terms of it actually creating change, very limited effect.
Yeah.
And when we're trying to transform an organisation, we need fast effect over a duration.
Yeah.
And transforming an organisation only a year, not really a huge amount of time.
Yeah.
But we need time for our people to adapt those skills and create
practice
behaviours
them and practice them and practice them. And that's the third point, which is about the pace. And McKinsey talk about faster is better, and they're really saying between the time you launch and the time you get your kind of final people onto your program, don't leave it too long. That's not the point. To us, the point about pace is cadence, and the monthly cadence is something that we see work really well. And that's the bite-sized pieces. It's long enough for people to have time to practice it, but not so long that they get bored. So breadth, depth, and pace or cadence.
And I think that cadence creates a learning habit as well.
Exactly.
Every month I'm taking on a new skill, I'm practicing it, I'm getting coached around it, I'm learning it, I'm using it with my team. So we get into this habit of learning, which again reinforces that kind of master skill of learning to learn.
And people love it. People are crying out for it, which is kind of takes us to the third part of that diamond. Again, they talk about maximising behavioural change transfer or some such.
In real speak?
Interpreted skill, apply the skills. And in the application of those skills, you will develop more skill. You'll get, it's the practice makes perfect. It's as simple as that. But that does require the programs to be skill focused rather than conceptual, because you can't really practice concepts, can you?
No.
They're not things you can do. They're things you can think, and you can kind of repeat them to yourself over and over. But in the end, it's behaviours, what people do, that drives the results. Yes, you change the way they think, but then you've got to change what they do, and that's what drives change. And then the fourth one is around...
Well, maybe let's do a little pause there, because our observation of those first three elements of the leadership diamond are things that an effective learning program can bring to your organisation, whether you build it internally or use something like ours. Those first three are almost owned by the program.
Correct.
So it's about the program design, characteristics of the program. But this next bit, the fourth element, that's the one that has to be owned by the internal team. Where they add the most influence.
And that's got to be, if you want to transform your organisation, small or big, you cannot simply overlay a leadership development program or anything external. You have to change the way, you have to adapt what you do to the program. And I've just been working on something called the Coach Playbook for our program, and that's about what participants on AMP, what their leaders have to be thinking about. And actually, every time it goes, this is going to be a little bit challenging, because, I use the example in our organisation of one of the things we say to people about how to manage your time is get comfortable with saying, I'd love to, but I can't. Great way to stop getting kind of, seagulled. Bosses come in, drop stuff, and sort it out, and then
you had an experience of that this week, didn't you?
I did. So I suggested that one of the team might like to, do this or that. And she said, I'd love to, but I can't. And I thought, ouch. And then, but it's great, because it meant I had to think of, okay, that's exactly what I wanted to say. That's what the program says to say. And she's honouring her commitment. And it all comes down to honouring your commitment. This integration piece is, if you say that that's important, then you need to act like it. So it was over to me then to go, either I have to find another way of doing that, or I have to accept that it's going to come into a time, we have to talk about either the scope, the resource, or the timeline.
Correct.
So, that's integration. And that's why most of them fail, because it's not anything particularly wrong with the programs other than they're workshops rather than blended learning, but leave that aside. It's that the organisation itself doesn't change, doesn't adapt to its own kind of description of best practice and the way things ought to be. So that's going to remain the challenge. That's the critical piece in all of it. You can probably, a leadership program can get you 75% of the way there, but if you want to get the whole way, this is the bit.
And I think the sporting analogy here, or the music analogy, is to have a really great plan around what we're going to do. Everyone agrees that yes, that's how we're going to play on game day or on stage. And then we get out there, something goes a little bit different, and someone goes, oh, but what about the game plan?
Yeah.
And the on-field leader or the on-stage leader goes, oh, no, we're not doing that anymore. It's like, well, you've actually just given up on what you were trying to achieve in the first place.
And it's even less conscious than that. It's kind of, and we've seen this time and time again. The sports analogy is good. The team go onto the field, they've got a game plan, something happens, and they just revert to headless chooks. It's like Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And as that kind of, people just revert. And organisations are like that. All organisations suffer from inertia and myopia. And so the biggest change is not inside people, it's inside this thing called and this is true of small businesses as much as it is large. So it's the challenge, it's the key challenge.
A great framework from McKinsey. We personally, based on our experience working with organisations, have a slight adaptation, I guess, of the model. But broadly, those 4 approaches. If you're looking to transform your organisation, large or small, it's a good place to start. And if you'd like more information around that leadership diamond from McKinsey, we have some condensed versions of it we can share with you. We'll put some links in the show notes, and we'd welcome your comments, particularly those that have been inside organisation transformation or tried to do it. What have you observed has worked well and not so well, and how have those 4 elements of the diamond been applied that you've observed?
Be really interested.
Great job. Thanks. See you next time.
Cheers.